Hi everyone, it's Jasmine. On today's episode of the Slane Project, I am going to be going over the cases of Rene Gunning and Krystle Knott. They were abducted and murdered when they were hitchhiking from the West Edmonton Mall in February 2005. And the t-shirt I am wearing is from the National Native American Boarding Schools Healing Coalition. They gather and compile data on the boarding schools of the US. In Canada, they're better known as residential schools. I'm going to leave a link to their website where you could purchase this t-shirt to help support their cause. On with the case.
Hitchhiking used to be a very popular mode of transportation. It was seen as a carefree, cheap, and harmless way to get from point A to point B. But as time went on, people began to realize the horrors that went along with this. Many serial killers evolved from the hitchhiking era of the 1970s and 1980s. The things men would do to women when they knew that no one was around to witness is horrifying. It truly brought out the evil in mankind. Today, many people are aware that this is not safe and the popularity of hitchhiking has greatly decreased. But in the US and Canada, in the indigenous communities, it has remained a constant. The reservations are often isolated, with towns few and far between, and there is often no public transportation. There are not many jobs available on the reservation, so poverty is commonplace. People still have to work, get to appointments, go grocery shopping, or just visit friends and family. Rene Gunning and Krystle Knott were just trying to get home the night they disappeared. Some sick person took their lives and dumped them in the remote forests of northern Alberta. They laid there for a little over 6 years. The person or persons who did this was able to go about their lives, while these girls' families waited in anguish. Rene Gunning was 19 years old and living in Fort St. John, the Peace River area in northern BC. Her father, Jerome Gunning, was in a common law relationship with her mother. He goes by the nickname Joe, which I will call him in the rest of the video. When Rene was a teenager, her parents split up and Rene and her siblings went to live with her mom in Nanaimo, a city on Vancouver Island. Joe went to visit them one day and learned that their mom had put them in foster care. He was upset that their mom didn't tell them and asked if he wanted to care for them. He called a family meeting and told everybody that he will get clean and sober so they can live with him in Fort St. John. Joe did everything he said and came back in about 6 months for his kids. Rene wasn't initially going to go, but just as Jerome was going to pull out of the driveway, Rene came running up and said she wanted to go too. Things were good in Fort St. John. Joe had a steady job. He was a hard worker and did his best to take care of his children. Rene would have a son, DeAndre, when she was about 18 years old. Rene became pregnant again, and a few months before she disappeared, she miscarried the baby. She was about 5.5 months pregnant. Rene was always fighting with her boyfriend, and it is believed he was abusive towards her. When he was out of town, Rene decided to get away for a little bit. She called her friend Naomi and asked her if she wanted to leave town for a few days. Naomi said yes, and they began hitchhiking to Edmonton, Alberta. This was on February 17th, 2005. Naomi said that her and Rene were drinking when they started their journey from Fort St. John. A man picked them up early in their walk and wanted to have sex with them. They declined and got out at the next stop. Some nice people picked them up outside of Dawson Creek and brought them into Grand Prairie. Naomi said that they tried to hitchhike from there around 2 a.m., but nobody was around to pick them up. The highway was dead. They eventually stayed the night with the people who picked them up outside of Dawson Creek and continued to Edmonton the next day. Rene and Naomi made it to Fox Creek along Highway 43 and hitched a ride with the trucker who was fueling up. He brought them all the way to Edmonton and dropped them off at the West Edmonton Mall on February 18, 2005. I could not find what time they made it there, but they were there for at least a few hours. They ran into two friends, Sarah McLeod and Krystle Knott. They all knew each other except Rene did not know Krystle. They only met that day. Sarah and Krystle were in Edmonton for about a month at the time and staying with Sarah's boyfriend. Krystle was 16 years old from Duncan First Nation and was raised by her Aunt Doris in High Prairie, Alberta. Krystle moved with her biological mother just before she turned 15 and moved to Dawson Creek. Krystle and her mother did not get along, and she started to hitchhike to get away from her. And Doris always warned Krystle about the dangers of hitchhiking. The last time she saw Krystle was in January 2005. She was visiting her for the weekend and dropped her off at her friend's apartment in Dawson Creek. At the mall that day, Rene tried to buy some weed from someone and they ripped her off. She then bought a bottle of vodka and some Sprite with Naomi's money. Naomi got mad and took off walking with Sarah. They went to Sarah's boyfriend's house for a party that was going on. Rene and Krystle stayed at the mall because they saw a guy they liked and drank the vodka and Sprite. The plans were for them to meet up at the party later. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., they called the apartment the girls went to and said the mall was closing and they didn't know what to do or where to go. Naomi and Sarah had offered to pay cab fare for them to come to the apartment. Rene declined the offer and hung up. She called back a short time later and said her and Krystle were hitchhiking back home, either to Dawson Creek or Fort St. John. In 2005, cell phones were just starting to get really popular. Still, not a lot of people had them. They also were not the smart cell phones that everybody has today. They were just basic phones that called out and received text messages. A lot of people still used payphones, and most people had house phones, also known as landline phones. From what I have read, I think neither of these girls had cell phones. This was the last time anyone who knew Rene and Krystle heard from them. They were never seen alive again. Some might wonder why these two decided to hitchhike a 650-kilometer distance so late at night. These girls were still pretty young and used to hitchhiking. Plus, they were intoxicated and probably didn't figure out the whole plan yet. I think a lot of people have done a lot of careless things when they were young. Just think back to your own teenagers. These girls were just living in the moment. They did not deserve what was coming for them. On February 28, 2005, a press release went out in Fort St. John asking for information about Rene. The next day, on March 1st, this was revised and information was also requested for Naomi. However, Naomi returned home in mid-March. She was soon questioned about Rene and told him everything she knew. Around this same time, Doris went to go visit Krystle again. She realized she was missing and filed a report with the RCMP. The next press release was on May 22, 2005, and only named Rene. Another release on June 10th had information about Rene and simply stated that she was in the company of another female from Dawson Creek. Krystle was not named in the release and her picture was not published. Naomi stated that she answered questions about Rene and Krystle. Krystle's aunt had reported her missing, but yet there was nothing. Both disappearances were initially investigated in British Columbia, where the pair was from. They were later turned over to Alberta and Project Care took over the investigation. Project Care was a branch of the Alberta RCMP and investigated the deaths and disappearance of vulnerable people in Alberta. Exactly 3 years after the pair went missing, on February 18, 2008, Project Care announced in the Edmonton Journal that they were looking for the pair. This was the first time Krystle's name and face was included in the media releases. Although Rene had been the subject of a few other media releases, this was the first major publication for her. Soon after the pair went missing, their families were in Edmonton looking for them. Rene's dad Joe made about 4 trips to West Edmonton Mall to look for his daughter. This was no easy task. The mall is huge. It's about 5,300,000 square feet, has about 800 stores, 2 hotels, 100 dining venues. The parking lot has room for 20,000 vehicles. There are between 90,000 to 200,000 shoppers daily, depending on the season, and has 9 attractions, which include the Ice Palace where Naomi last seen Rene and Krystle. Krystle's Aunt Doris and her husband moved to Edmonton to search for her. Her husband would ride his bike or drive his car until about midnight every day after work. The police told them at the time she was possibly a sex worker on the streets. They never had any evidence to support this claim. This was just racial stereotyping. Little did they know is that they were more than likely already dead. While they were still missing, Rene's dad had 2 dreams about her. The first one, she knocked on the door, and when he answered, he said, "Hello, stranger. Long time no see. Come on in." He turned around and walked away, and she stepped through the threshold, and that was the end of the dream. The second one, Rene and him were talking, and he asked her where she has been, that they were looking everywhere for her. He asked why she didn't call home. Rene said that where they had us, they wouldn't let us go. Joe was going to ask her another question, and his alarm went off for work. He tried desperately to hurry and shut it off so he could continue the dream. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Finally, just a little over 6 years of being missing, Rene and Krystle's remains were found on May 21st, 2011. A man was setting up camp on Forestry Trunk Road, about 60 kilometers south of Grand Prairie. This location was more near Diebolt, Alberta. He started to smell something dead. He walked a little bit into the bush and was relieved to see a rotting moose. But upon closer examination, there were 2 skulls laying right next to it. This man had camped at the same spot before but never noticed them. If it weren't for the rotting moose, the girls may have never been found. There was no clothing with the remains. There was just the 2 skulls and a leg bone. Animals probably scattered the rest of the remains. Rene was identified by dental records first. Krystle was identified using DNA. The area was remote and possibly covered in snow because it was mid-February. This is assuming they were disposed of around the same time they went missing. A truck or SUV with 4-wheel drive would have been necessary to dump them in the spot. Police had asked for the public to come forward if they had seen the girls hitchhiking the night they left the mall. They wanted to know if they were seen on either Highway 16 or Highway 43. Rene had hitchhiked down Highway 43 on her way to Edmonton. Naomi stated that they were in Fox Creek. She may have gone the same way back home. Naomi had stated that police had found the guy from the mall that Rene and Krystle stayed back at the mall for. He was questioned and cleared by authorities. One very disturbing thing Naomi said was about the trucker who picked him up in Fox Creek when he was feeling up. This trucker had made an off remark meant to be a joke about murdering Rene. Personally, I do not believe in coincidences when it comes to murder. I think this man very well may have harmed Rene and Krystle. He was on his way into Edmonton to drop off a load. He had to keep his schedule, so he really didn't have time to hurt Rene and Naomi on the trip going into Edmonton. So let's say he dropped off his delivery, got some dinner, and topped off his truck. He very may well have been leaving Edmonton around the same time as Rene and Krystle. I think when the girls left the mall that they either were asking for rides in the parking lot or went to a nearby gas station to ask. It appears they were able to get a ride in the right direction home. They could have been dropped off midway or taken all the way up to Grand Prairie by the person who picked them up. Either way, the person or people who murdered Rene and Krystle seem to have known the dump site area really well. They probably lived in the area. It makes you wonder if there are other women dumped in this area. This killer did not start or stop their killing spree with Rene and Krystle. Naomi described the man as being 40 to 45 years old, about 5'5". He had short black hair and said he had 2 kids that are around 23 years old. Naomi desperately wishes she could remember more about this man. But it was about a whole month before she even knew that Rene never made it home. As always, if you know something, say something. Even the smallest detail can help. Do not assume someone else reported what you saw. Does the truck driver sound familiar? He made frequent trips to Edmonton in the early 2000s. He would now be near retirement age and his kids would be around 40 years old by now. He possibly lived in northern Alberta. Could this trucker be responsible for more murders and disappearances in the Edmonton area? If you have any information, please contact the Alberta Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS, or you could submit an anonymous tip online.
That's all I have for you today. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. And also, if you knew Renee or Krystle, please leave any memories of them in the comment section. And I do hope that these girls are resting in peace. I will see you next time.